Welcome, everyone. I call this meeting of the House Children and Family Affairs Subcommittee to order. Haley, would you please call the roll?
Representatives Bricken, Carter, Eldridge, here. Gillespie, here. Harris, here. Stewart, here. Chairman Littleton.
Here.
Madam Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Are there any personal orders today? Seeing none, we'll get started. First bill is House Bill 874 by Chairman Terry. I don't see him in the room, so we'll roll him down a couple of spaces. You'll help me remember that? Yeah. Okay. So next we have item number 2, House Bill 323 by Representative Hodges. Do I hear a motion and a second?
Motion. Second.
Properly motioned and second. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so this is a bill I had brought last year, and with everything that happened. But what it is in my district, if you remember, there was a 14-year-old girl that was held down by two 13-year-old boys. They raped her for about an hour. They video recorded the incident. It was a pretty brutal incident. Those children were eventually arrested and went to court, where they made jokes, laughed. And essentially they got probation because the judge didn't have the discretion to do anything more than that. So what this bill would do would be to allow that judge, at the judge's discretion, to give those kids some time in juvenile detention. And I think that's the least we can do for the victim. So with that, if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Well, I do want to say I think that's horrific what happened and that there was no punishment. So appreciate you bringing this bill forward. Are there any questions or concerns for Representative? Questions been called for? Any objection? Are we ready to vote? All those in favor of House Bill 323 going out to civil pool say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Ayes have it.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And I forgot at the beginning to say Representative McKenzie has rolled House Bill 466, which is item number 5, to the final calendar. Oh, I'm sorry, 2 weeks. So next we have item number 3, which is House Bill 1371 by Representative Hulsey, and I think we're going to have to roll that to the bottom of the hill today. So next is item number 4, 1186, and that would be Whip Garrett. Do we hear a motion and a second? Properly motioned and second. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Committee. This is the Bankers Association has brought me this trust legislation again. This traveled through last session, and it passed actually in the House unanimously. The legislation got caught up in what we were commonly referred to as got coded. And so one reason I'm bringing this back is that Tennessee, believe it or not, is probably top 3 state in the country for trust assets here. In the past 5 or 6 years, we've gone from $25 billion in assets to $125 billion worth of assets that are managed here. And the reason for that is because legislation designed by this 27 or 28 long page bill, we have very strong trust related bills, so people want to bring their money here, which creates jobs, et cetera, for those folks that manage that money, that manage trusts under management. So this is great legislation to continue that trend, so more folks bring their assets here that we can govern under trust. So with that, I'll be glad to take any questions from the committee. And Madam Chair, I do believe there's an amendment with the bill that actually makes the bill. Code is 004455.
Motion. Did you say anything about it?
Properly motioned and second. I guess that made the bill.
That made the bill, Madam Chair.
Already explained. All right. All those in favor of Amendment 4455 say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The amendment is on.
So with that, since the amendment makes the bill, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Representative Gillespie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Garrett, for bringing this. I just want to make a comment. I think it's a great bill. I'm all about making the state a better place for its citizens and to attract people to move to it. And I think this will help accomplish that. So thank you.
Thank you for that.
Question on the bill?
Questions have been called forth. Or any objection?
Wait, I had a question real quick.
Would you?
Yeah.
Representative Stewart, you're recognized.
I just wanted to find out whether the Bar Association has looked at this and if they approved it or do they have an issue with it.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're recognized.
Thank you. And I actually misspoke when I said the bar. The actual Bankers Association brought me the legislation, but I do know that we have discussed it with the Bar Association, and they have no issues with it as well.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you for that question.
Any other questions? Question's been called for. Are we ready to vote? All those in favor of House Bill 1186 moving out to civil full, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it.
Thank you,
Give me
Madam
that.
Chair and Committee. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Next on the calendar, we have number 6, House Bill 908 by Chairman Doggett. Do I hear a motion and a second? Properly motioned and second. You are recognized.
Thank you, Chair Lady Littleton. I had to run over here from another committee, if you'll bear with me just for a moment. Let me gather my,
It's kind of the busy time of year again, isn't it?
it is. But anyway, thank you, committee, for hearing this legislation today. I know that there has been a lot of questions about this, and I'm sure that there have been numerous groups and even the departments that have reached out to you all regarding this legislation. There has been said to me that a bill like this would prevent folks from reporting suspected child abuse and neglect. That is not our intent with this legislation, to in any way hurt a child, especially one that is being abused or neglected. But what I have seen in my experience as an adult, and hearing with other Tennesseans from across the state since being elected to the General Assembly, is that at times the reporting through DCS has been used as a tool of harassment, because those reporting can do so anonymously. In some cases, reports have been made on the father of children, the mother of children, ex-husbands, ex-wives, grandparents, and so forth. And some of these reports, some of these reports have been completely unfounded. I have my own personal experiences where I've seen this not as someone who was on the end of receiving a visit or a call from DCS, but yet being an employer with employees where DCS has arrived at my workplace wanting to question employees because of an anonymous phone call that they had received some days before. When I worked in my time in law enforcement, I often was asked as a deputy to escort employees of DCS out to homes because of complaints that they had received, to do a visit to follow up on some of these anonymous calls that they had received. As my time with a deputy, not one time of the calls that I went on was there ever any findings of truth to what the call was. I always had my suspicions and suspections of what could have been done, if that's even really a word. But I've had constituents that have come to me that have been through this, who have had calls made because perhaps they were, in their minds, their thought was they had ran for school board seat or some other form of elected office and had won, and it was some type of retaliation. I've also had constituents that come to me because they have custody of a child, and the other guardian has had just attempts to harass them by making allegations and reports of abuse and neglect that eventually were unfounded. The real issue that we have is that there is no recourse for that harassment. A person can go to court and petition a judge to find out who it is that has been harassing them through this or who had made those reports, and there's no record because it was all anonymous. Now, the department has told me that there is a cause or a course of action that could be taken, and it's a felony, actually, to file a false report. The only problem is that you do not know who filed the false report. And so with this legislation here, it simply states that any report that's made that's called into DCS, any complaint of child abuse or neglect, that the person must give their name, they must give their contact information, and then they give the report. They're guaranteed that they will be kept confidential. That information will not be shared. The only way under this legislation that information can be shared is if the, for lack of better words, I would call the respondent or a petitioner could go to court and show with cause to a judge that there indeed has been some harassment. It would then be the judge's discretion whether or not to order DCS to release those names so that a potential civil suit or charges could be brought for harassment against those that are making those calls. It's not an automatic thing that happens. It's not something that's guaranteed that every time that someone makes an allegation that there's harassment against them because DCS has come to their house multiple times or to their workplace to investigate, that they would be able to find out who it is. They've still got to go to a judge, and the judge has to hear their plea. And the judge has to make that determination whether or not that they are going to allow the release of that information. And so I'm sure that there are several questions, and I may have missed some things here, and I apologize if I did, but I stand free to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you for being here and for your compassion today for this problem. I understand it is a problem, but we just need to figure out how we work with that. So.
Correct. Thank you.
Representative Stewart.
Am I right that the way the bill works is it would eliminate or limit people's ability to anonymously address child abuse? Or report it, rather?
You're recognized.
Anyone under this legislation can report child abuse or neglect. The only caveat is with this legislation is that you have to provide your name and contact information.
Representative Stewart.
Do you worry, though, I understand your concern about the misuse of that. It's a real concern, and that I'm sure that's happened, and that's bad. Do you worry, though, if you take away the anonymity, you're going to have children that are abused and it won't be reported because people are too fearful to report the abuser? You know, maybe a neighbor, a coworker, is not going to want to report because they're afraid that the person will retaliate against them or that will make their life difficult. What do you think about that?
I think that anyone that calls to make a complaint of child abuse or neglect are doing so for the safety and the welfare of that child. And if they themselves are not willing to go forward with that complaint to make that known, anywhere else that you have in our judicial system, there's always discovery. There is no discovery. There is no way to know. You do not stand to face your accusers, especially if you are charged. If someone is charged, they still should have that opportunity to stand before their accusers in this.
You're recognized.
I guess my concern would be that here, it's not like a typical lawsuit where the accuser is the one to benefit. Here, the beneficiary is the child and can't really make an accusation. I would be concerned of a situation where somebody is afraid to come forward because the potential abuser is, for example, their boss at work or in a position of power over them. I think what I would be worried about is this would create a chilling effect and on reporting of child abuse, and it's such a serious matter. I'm afraid, as stated, I'm concerned about your bill. I don't think I can vote for it because I'm just worried that even though you're right, even though you raise a real concern, and I think it should be addressed in some way, I'm worried that some child will be killed or injured because someone didn't make a report because they're afraid of retaliation or other negative consequences that they are unable to respond to. And I would just say, you're a state representative, you're a leader in your community, a powerful person. And I imagine you would report child abuse regardless of its impact on you personally. But the fact that you're standing here in this room shows that you've already, you're in a position of power. You approach the world from a position of power and authority. A lot of people don't approach the world that way, and they're really not in a position, if the only job you hold is going to be jeopardized by making one of these reports, and you have children that you yourself have to support, you may not be willing to step forward. I think it's asking a little much of our citizens. So I'm concerned. I think your bill is well-intentioned, but I am concerned that we may create a situation where reports will not be made and children will be harmed. So I'm concerned about your bill.
You recognize.
I would, thank you for your comments, and there's many things that you hit on, and some of those I may address and some of those I may not, but in the long run, what I'll get to here is that, number one, children safety, welfare is number one, first and foremost. But with this legislation, it was carefully tailored to make sure that people will continue to remain anonymous throughout this process. The only way that their names would ever come forward is if you read through there several times, multiple claims, and someone could go to court and ask for, petition for that. These claims would be unfounded because they would be seen as harassment. And so, it's very difficult, and it's really unfair for state departments to be weaponized against moms and dads and grandparents and aunts and uncles who love their children and take care of their children, doing the best they can. Some of them are single parents that are doing all that they can just to have another spouse or the guardian of a child to use a state agency, taxpayer dollars, our dollars, to harass another. But I do appreciate your comments and understand where you're coming from on this, so thank you.
Representative Eldridge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chairman Doggett, I share your concern with children's welfare. I do worry that maybe it might in some way cause someone not to step forward. There are situations like that. And back several years ago, I had a situation there where, we actually had known of child abuse. And we did step forward. But again, I agree that some people tend not to. Madam Chair, I would think that this needs to be looked at farther. I think maybe if we can manage to get with DCS and you and see if there's something that can be worked out. I understand the problem that you relayed to us with your coworker, but Madam Chair, I would make a motion to move this to a summer study.
Second.
A motion and a second. Is there any objection? Hearing none, are we ready to vote? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The ayes have it. So we'll work on that this summer.
Thank you. Chair Lady, may I say one more thing?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you, committee, for indulging me on this. And I do sincerely look forward to hopefully we can get together and come to something on this. This is something that certainly does need to be addressed. And I thank you all for your questions and your comments.
Thank you. So next, we're going to go back out of order and go to item 1, House Bill 874 by Chairman Terry. Do we hear a motion? Motion. Second. Properly motioned and second. You're recognized. And
Right.
I think I see some amendments.
Yes, thank you. Let's see, let me find the amendment that I would like to put on the bill. It is, I believe it's Amendment 5154.
That's the one you want on?
Yes.
Okay. Did you want? Motion on amendment. Do I hear a second? Properly motioned and second. You're recognized on amendment
Right.
5154.
Thank you, and I appreciate your indulgence with rolling me and accommodating me for me to go chair my own committee and then come back.
We're all in the same boat
Thank
today.
you. And this issue was brought to me by a family law attorney, and I had worked on this with DCS before we came into session, essentially filed a caption bill, came up with an idea to come up with what we thought was a solution, what we think is a solution to get the ball rolling. This language that is on the amendment is language that was worked out with DCS, and what it simply does is it would require a caseworker to document any objections to a child's placement with a relative by another relative or interested party, and in addition, the information will be added to the annual report on foster care.
Do you have any questions, concerns? All those in favor of amendment 5154, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Move forward as amended.
Oh,
No, you want to explain the bill too? Or
that's
does that
that's
make
the bill. So, yeah. So,
Okay. Are there any questions? Questions being called for? Are there any objections? Hearing none, do we vote, are we ready to vote aye on 874 as amended? Those say, I don't know what's wrong with me right now. Hold on. Okay, all those in favor of 874 as amended, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. You move out to the civil pool.
thank you, Chairman and Committee.
Sorry for that confusion. Okay, we need to go to number 3. So now we'll move back to number 3, House Bill 1371 by Chairman Halsey. Motion. Second. Properly motioned and seconded. Chairman Halsey, you're
Thank you,
recognized.
Madam
I'll see if
Chairman
I can
and
do better
committee. I
this time.
appreciate that. Last year, I can't remember, last year's messed up. It was either last year or the year before, we voted to allow state representatives to be able to solemnize marriages in this state. This bill just adds notaries public to that list of folks who can solemnize marriages.
I think pretty soon it's going to be those that cannot instead of those that can.
It's probably a better way of looking at it, yeah.
Do we have any questions or concerns? Hearing none, are we ready to vote? Without objection, we're voting on House Bill 1371. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You move out to civil.
Thank you, Committee and Chairman.
So now we'll move on to number 7, House Bill 1164 by Representative Harris. Do we hear a motion and a second?
Motion.
Properly motion and second. Representative Harris, you're recognized.
Oh,
On 1164.
Chair Lady, I'm so sorry. On 1164, I am going to be rolling that one.
Rolled 1 week. Without objection. 1164 is rolled 1 week. Okay, you are recognized now on item number 8, 1166. Do you hear a motion and a second?
Motion.
Properly motion and second. You are recognized.
Thank you, Chairwoman. So I do have an amendment on this bill as well.
And that number is?
4451.
That's correct. Do you want to tell us about your amendment?
Yeah, so on the amendment, all it does is add 6 words, which is who is also in foster care. And the reason we had to add that is because initially it would have allowed siblings in foster care to also be able to communicate with siblings outside of foster care. And that would have caused a $10,000 fiscal note. So to keep from having the fiscal note, we made some language changes to where the bill is only for foster youth who are already under DCS care.
Are there any questions on the amendment? I thought we had, We need a motion and a second on the amendment.
Motion.
Properly motion and second. Are we ready to vote? Are there any questions on Amendment 4451? Hearing none, all those in favor of adding the Amendment 4451 to 1166, say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment goes on. So now you are recognized on House Bill 1166.
Thank you, Chairwoman. So with this bill, House Bill 1166 requires that a foster care agency provide contact information to a sibling, to siblings who are also in foster care but live in separate homes, if doing so is in the best interest of each child and if the children so choose to communicate. So a lot of my legislation is around foster and youth adoption. I have two minor constituents who were separated in DCS and placed in separate homes. DCS usually does and they typically do a really good job of making sure that siblings are placed together, but this didn't happen in this case. And so there was a situation where one sibling was unable to communicate with the other sibling, and it was used as a form of punishment by the foster parent. Obviously, that was rectified by DCS later on, but this bill would keep siblings having the ability to communicate with each other, but also that communicating with each other wouldn't be used as a punishment. And so with that, I turn it back over to the chair.
Any questions? Vice Chair Bricken, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I think I caught the nature of this, but I'm a little bit concerned do we have an isolated case here? And I certainly probably would like to hear from DCS on this. I mean, again, it seems fair, but I mean, you know, here you have a foster parent that possibly has chose for good reason to prevent that child from communicating with his natural sibling. And it's hard to know in the circumstances. So I just don't know. It says merit, and I certainly would like to hear DCS if they would like to speak on this.
We're going to go out of session first. So without objection, we're going to go out of session and ask DCS to come up. Would you please come forward and state your name and who you're with, please?
Drew Wright, DCS. Thank you, Representative Bricken, for the question. So just to kind of just give our side of it a little bit, I guess we did work with Representative Harris on this bill for his amendment 4451 that he's introduced to the committee. So the initial thought was that the bill as filed would have potentially a big lift for the department to locate any siblings, and it was a little kind of a wide net, and so we worked to narrow that to any other siblings that were in foster care. So no problems with that. We're deferred on that amendment. And just, I guess if you want to pinpoint a question for me, I'm happy to try to.
Vice Chair Bricken.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for instance, I mean, when foster children are split into foster care families, what currently is the rule of communication engagement between the siblings? I mean, and what a parent of one of the child, and I don't know what caused this particular instance that Representative Harris was dealing with, but I mean, of course, I'm a parent of 4 kids, and I'm sitting there thinking, you know, possibly, you know, I'm trying to think of the scenario if they were somewhere away, and I said, gosh, you know, as a parent, I have the right to don't want you to be on the phone, use your cell phone, whether it's your sibling or someone else. And I don't know, again, I'm just kind of wondering what the currently rules of engagement is for loud communication. in a foster care environment before I try to come up with a scenario.
Mr. Wright, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Lady. And Representative, yes, so it would not be such that this bill or current practice would be that a child could communicate at any hour of the day with another sibling. This will be just to allow and encourage communication within common hours or within the foster parent's discretion. Again, Representative Harris pointed out the punitive nature of the potentially isolated incident. We would never condone a punitive action like that. One thing, there are occasions where a sibling might be a perpetrator of an assault or some type of behavior like that on another sibling. That's why it's important to keep the best interest of the child in the provision, and Representative Harris's amendment does that. So that would be one instance where it would not be a good for them to communicate. But just the sharing of information, providing the contact information would not, in my opinion, allow the child to communicate at any hour of the day or inviolate, still allow the foster parent to keep order in the house. Just can't be used punitively.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Thank you for being here. We are back in session. You're recognized.
Thank you so much, and I'll roll it back to the chair.
Are there any other questions for the sponsor? Hearing none, are we ready to vote? All those in favor of House Bill 1166 as amended, moving out to civil pool, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. You move out. And now we're going out of session and passing the gavel over to Vice Chair Eldridge.
All right, we're back in session. We're on item number 9, House Bill 417. Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Second? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Chair Lady Littleton, you're properly before us, and I see your bill is traveling with an amendment.
It is, and the amendment is 5226, and it does make the bill.
5226. We have a motion on the amendment.
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the amendment. Chair Lady, you're recognized on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. This bill knowingly allowing a child to be within a structure where a Schedule I controlled substance is present and accessible to a child makes it severe child abuse. That's
Okay.
it. And
Is there any questions for the sponsor on the amendment? Seeing none, we're voting on the amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Okay, Chair Lady, you're recognized on your bill as amended.
the amendment made the bill.
Amendment made the bill. Any questions? Seeing none, we're voting on House Bill 417 as amended. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Your bill passes.
Thank you.
Next up is item number 10. And again, this is House Bill 389. Do we have a motion?
Motion.
We have a motion and a second. There is, I believe is there any amendments on this one?
No.
I don't see, okay, thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Chair Lady Littleton, you're recognized on your bill.
Thank you. This bill requires any person receiving federal or state-funded adoption assistance from the Department of Children's Services to annually provide DCS with medical records from the adopted child's annual physical examination or similar documentation from a medical or mental health professional, or verification of a full-time school enrollment from the school the child attends.
Okay.
And Mr. Vice Chair, I have Commissioner Nichols that I would really like to speak on this, and then I'd like to say a little more about it.
All right, very well. Okay, at this time, we will go out of session to hear from Commissioner Nichols. Commissioner, glad to have you here. If you would, just identify yourself for the record.
Jennifer Nichols, Commissioner DCS.
Thank you. You're recognized.
And thank you for the opportunity to be here, Chair Lady Littleton. This bill would allow, as it says, children who were adopted from DCS custody and are receiving federal or state assistance. It would allow the department to receive certain documents from them each year. We have not previously been able to do that like this. So if they have a physical, we would receive the documentation from their physician or nurse practitioner saying the child is in good health. If there is another medical provider or a mental health provider that can also give us the same documentation, that would be acceptable as well. A third option would be if they are enrolled full-time in school, we accept that documentation as well, the thought being that the teachers and principals and other staff at the school would see the child and know that they were in good health. It's different than what we've previously done. It would still allow children who reach the age of 18, if they fit certain categories, to remain in this system of receiving adoption assistance, and the parent would have to continue to provide documentation every single year between the age of 18 and 21, but at 21 it would stop altogether. And what allows a child to stay or to continue to receive adoption assistance, or their family to, is if they are still in high school, beyond the age of 18, or if they are in another vocational school that qualifies, or if they have a certain mental or physical disability, they can sometimes qualify. But again, at that point, they would still have to, the parent every single year would have to sort of recertify them. Children receive or qualify for adoption assistance through a number of different ways. These are children that, first of all, the adoption assistance contract is worked out before the adoption. And it goes to children who have, they use the term special needs, but it's not, special needs in this context doesn't necessarily mean what it's used in common language. In fact, a child can qualify to receive adoption assistance, or the family can, if the child is of a minority or cultural difference, if they're 2 years old or older, if they are Caucasian, 9 years or older, if it's a sibling group, if they have a certain medical or mental health condition. The bottom line is trying to get children adopted who may otherwise not be adopted. But those qualifications are spelled out very deliberately. There's a list of them that I could certainly provide to you all if you had questions. Though this wasn't a DCS bill, I'm familiar with what I guess started it. And, it was a situation in East Tennessee with a family that had adopted multiple children from DCS dating back over a decade. And 2 of those children are alleged to have been killed by the adoptive parents, and those charges are currently pending. But the bottom line is this bill would fill that gap. Those children had not been seen, were sort of under the radar for years and years. And I believe that was what was the impetus to this particular bill.
All right. Are there any questions for the commissioner from the committee? Chairman Bricken?
A couple. Some of the emails I've received, and I'm sure it's just the way things get communicated for adopted parents, thinking somehow DCS would start intruding on regular adopted parents. So somehow we better try to get the communications out, that this is only adopted parents that are receiving financial assistance, not every adopted parent. The situation, certainly on a previous bill dealing with child abuse, I mean, the case that's brought up makes you wonder why. I mean, a year is a long time to go between anything, especially when abuse could be occurring. So I'm surprised the financial assistance contract doesn't have some provisions within it for agencies to verify the welfare of the child as a condition of the financial contract versus having to require legislation. So I'd like you, if you would, comment on.
I think, our federal oversight initially, we've been given guidance that disfavors parents who adopt children to be treated differently, because in the eyes of the law and in your heart and every other way, the children are yours. And just like if you had a biological child, you don't have to trot them out and turn them around in the yard and say, look at here, I'm not hurting my child. And I'm not being, disrespectful when I say that. I mean, it's true. And so, 99.99999% of adoptive parents would never mistreat their child. And so, this does add I don't want to call it a burden, but it does require them to turn in this documentation. But remember, if somebody fails to turn in the documentation, what is triggered is that the department is allowed to go make a visit, where normally you don't just, DCS just doesn't go knock on somebody's door. So if they fail to provide the documentation, we can initiate a visit. I believe it says we may, not we shall. And the reason for that is if you have parents who, military parents, they could be overseas, or a youth could be studying abroad, or a number of different reasons. So the thought is not to make it harder on them. And that's part, I would imagine, why the 1 year was chosen. I will say it's a good bit of extra work for DCS, as you can imagine, to track every child that's been adopted through the agency. It's usually around 1,200 a year. And so, just you do it once when you're two, that's not going to be it. That's every single child, every single year until they're 18, unless they happen to fall in that category where you would do it until they're 21. So I'm not sure, who started with the year. Mr. Wright may know more. But I remember well meeting with Senator Yeager on it, and I don't remember an explanation in particular for why the year was chosen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for being here.
Yes, sir.
We'll go back into session. Chair Lady Littleton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Vice Chair Eldridge. That is the bill. We all know the situation. I'm not going to read it today, but I do plan to read the whole case in full. But it was a horrific case that brought this bill to us, and so I think this is the least that we can do to protect those children.
Thank you. Is there any further questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, we're ready to vote on House Bill 389. All those in favor of sending out to civil justice, full, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. The bill moves on. At this time, we'll go out of session for just a minute to hand the gavel back over.
Thank you. Okay, we're now back in session. And without objection, I want to go back out of session for a presentation from Matt Stowe, who's the district attorney for the 24th Judicial District. He's come to talk to us about elderly abuse. We know that it's happening, and we need to see, I guess, exactly how much of it goes on and how we can learn to understand, or not understand it, but to see it, to notice it when I see it. So Mr. Stowe is the District Attorney for Judicial District 24 in rural West Tennessee, comprised of Benton, Carroll, Decatur, Hardin, and Henry counties. The 24th Judicial District is one of the biggest districts, geographically speaking, in the state. Mr. Stowe is the former chairman of the TNDAGC, I'll let you say what that is later, Committee on Elder Abuse. In this capacity, he worked with dedicated legislators to draft and pass the Elderly and Vulnerable Adult Protection Acts of 17, 18, and 19, and he is presently a member of the TNDAGC Legislative Committee and the Committee on Family Abuse, and in this capacity is presently working with legislators this session to pass the Safe Seniors Act of 21. He's excited to be here, and we're excited to have him, so thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Chairwoman Middleton. It's great to be in front of all of you today. I see a lot of familiar faces from working on elder abuse bills in ancient times. One or two that I'm not as familiar with, and I look forward to getting to know you this session as I am working on Safe Seniors 2021 with several of you, and a number of other conference bills as well. The TNDAGC is a tongue twister, stands for Tennessee District Attorney General's Conference. That is the group by which we come together and vote and then take stances and sometimes propose legislation for y'all's consideration as well. I put together a PowerPoint presentation to show you. We're going to go through it in just a minute. In the quiet of my home, it takes 12 minutes. If for some reason it starts to take longer here, we will make adjustments. And I also want each of you to know two things. Number one, please, at any point when I'm talking, if you have a question, just interrupt. I would much rather be answering a question on something that matters to you than boring you to death. And the second point I would like to make today is I am very familiar with the phrase, move along, council. So if you all are ready for me to move along, simply say so. Today's presentation is called When Love Hurts, the Scourge of Family Abuse. My specialty is elder abuse. I have been working with you all hand in hand on elder abuse legislation for 6 years, even a little bit longer than that. But I did my presentation today because y'all's jurisdiction is greater, so I'm encompassing other areas of abuse as well, although elder abuse is my specialty. I have been working hand in hand with a general named General Zavianis out of the 31st Judicial District. Although we are political parties, we see eye to eye on everything that we'll be discussing today. And she supports this 100% as well. So I know that it's going to be very important to everyone to see us working together on this, because when it comes to protecting families, this is an area, and there's not many left in the world, but this is an area where you can find bipartisan agreement between people, at least as to the problem and oftentimes to solutions. Family is supposed to be really our everything. Family is the foundation on which so much has been built. And when people do not have the loving support of a family for one reason or another, outcomes, especially for children, can go way, way down. Families give you strength, they give you acceptance, they give you caring well-being, food and shelter, all of the things that are essential to getting through life, as well as giving us a purpose, a place to love and be loved. Unfortunately, for far too many Tennesseans, the family becomes something quite different. And living in the era in which we live, the COVID era, is extremely important because people are spending more time with their families than they ever have before. For a great many of us, and I certainly hope for you, that extra time has been a wonderful blessing. Unfortunately, for others, it exacerbates horrible, horrible problems. Families give our lives meaning. Winston Churchill, if you need somebody famous to say something along those lines, said that there is no doubt that it is around the family and the home that all of the greatest virtues are created, strengthened, and maintained. He said it much better than that. But sometimes vulnerable family members can become targets, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Who's vulnerable? Children is the first group. I'm not going to go through each of these individually because I do know you have the presentation, but children obviously can be physically weaker than their abusers. They may have difficulty communicating because of their age. They may not be able to report. Some of the most horrific abuse cases we see, for example, are shaken babies cases. When they result in fatalities, as they often do, obviously someone can't communicate, but a baby can't communicate even if the baby is lucky enough to survive. Because of these and other reasons, they become vulnerable. In addition, spouses and partners from time to time can be vulnerable. Some of the reasons here are the same if you had a chance to catch them on the children, but others are quite different. Emotional manipulation can play a role in child abuse, but oftentimes children are too young to truly be emotionally manipulated the way grown-ups are. Certainly can happen to spouses. As a matter of fact, it's very, very rare to find spouse or domestic abuse that does not involve some degree of emotional manipulation as well. Another thing here, the sharing of secrets within the confines of a marriage. There's something lawyers call the spousal privilege, which reflects the fact that spouses should be able to communicate things with each other, that you depend on your spouse to keep your secrets. Unfortunately, from time to time, you may admit to your spouse something that you wouldn't want the world to know. And then that becomes a source of power for them. Also, fear of the unknown, making things worse, financial support, a lot of the things that you're probably familiar with. Elderly and differently abled individuals can sometimes be vulnerable, sometimes for the same reasons, sometimes for different. Again, they may be physically weaker, but they aren't always. They may be subject to emotional manipulation. But we add a few things in there as well. The difficulty communicating may not often happen in battered spouse or battered partner situations, but can be, and oftentimes is, a problem in prosecuting elder abuse. As a matter of fact, overcoming communication and testifying difficulties posed by things like Alzheimer's disease is a major, major concern and a major, major impediment to prosecuting elder abuse cases. I just want to quickly make the point that anyone can be vulnerable. Oh, sorry, I went past that one pretty quickly. Doesn't even have to be people. You can have 2 legs or you can have 4 legs and be vulnerable for abuse. Pets can suffer from many of the same disabilities as humans. And oftentimes, the first sign of a trouble in a household is an abused pet. I'm going to go through some statistics if we have time that will show you that pet abuse is coextensive with almost every other problem that you can see in terms of family abuse. And you can usually see the signs in the pets before you can in the people. Someone's dog is afraid to ever be around them. Sometimes that could be a problem with the dog, but not often. How bad are we talking here? Well, this really shocked me when I discovered it. And I didn't believe it, to be honest with you, so I ran and checked it. More than half of all violent crime in Tennessee is family violence related. That means that whatever else this committee is also a very important part of fighting crime. More than half of all violent crime. That means that family violence is deadlier than gang violence. Family violence is deadlier than drug violence. Family violence is deadlier than racial violence. Family violence is deadlier than impaired driving, which is the second most dangerous violent thing that we'll encounter. And most importantly, it's more dangerous than all of them combined. Now, can you imagine the headlines that we see every day about racial violence, drug violence, and gang violence, and understanding that if you put them all together, it's not as important as the family violence that is the subject matter of this committee? And if you understand that and really wrap your mind around it, then you've heard what I had to say today. All right. How bad is the problem for children? Just to give you a few statistics here, physical abuse is one of the kinds of assaults that we can have. It's very common. One of the worst cases that I have is a spanking case where, unfortunately, the spanking was done after the consumption of alcohol. You know that driving may not be bad normally, but after alcohol can be very bad. And I can assure you that the spanking that occurred in this case was very bad. I wanted to bring some pictures to show you today initially. I actually had pictures for everything we're talking about. I have pictures from a case that I have done. But I have never come down here and tried to pass legislation by showing you guys graphic images. You don't need it. You're responsible adults. However, if you want to see some of the things that we're talking about, or if you have a use for it in a presentation of your own, please let me know and I will get it to you. Shaken baby case counts for almost 50% of all child abuse fatalities. I have had 3 during my time. They are very difficult cases to prosecute. They're getting more difficult these days, and it's really something that we would love to address, shaken baby cases. Physical neglect, as bad as the actual abuse is, the neglect cases, whether it's child abuse, elder abuse, or spousal abuse that we are talking about, are worse. I have pictures of neglect cases that there's an emerging science about secondary trauma that one can get just from hearing stories about terrible abuse or looking at pictures. I definitely did not include the pictures from some of these neglect cases because they are so graphic that despite how many homicide scenes I've been to, and I can't even tell you how many it's been anymore, those pictures stick out in my mind more than the actual decedents that I have seen on those scenes. That's how bad it can be. Bed sores are extremely, extremely graphic. Starvation, you probably at some point before I came in saw some pictures of people that suffered extreme starvation during World War II, and you know how disturbing those pictures are. Unfortunately, I've seen pictures that are just as bad, and they're right here in Tennessee. So it is happening. Neglect is the most common form of abuse. I've got to be very careful with my finger here. Will affect at least 1 out of 4 women during their lifetime. And this was fascinating to me. More than 50% of homeless women report domestic abuse as the cause of their homelessness. Now, nobody's hooked up to a lie detector before they make that report, but that 50% number, that also shocked me. Homeless people, when I thought of those before, I thought about people with mental health issues. I thought about people with drug issues. But I think there is a third group that may be as big as the other 2 that I just mentioned, and it has to do with this, when domestic abuse gets out of hand. What about the elderly? At least 10% of adults aged 65 and older will experience some form of elder abuse annually. That statistic to me is not shocking until you see the word annually. Annually. Do you know 10 people over age 65? That means you know somebody, statistically speaking, you know somebody that will suffer abuse this year. Very shocking to me. There's 5 kinds of basic types: caregiver neglect, financial exploitation, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, and physical abuse. And they cause all kinds of primary issues such as hospitalization and secondary issues such as depression and suicide. Quick note on our 4-legged friends. Every year, more than 10 million animals die from abuse. Approximately 65 of all abused animals are dogs. The most heartbreaking case that I have not been able to do anything about are puppy mills. I have been to some. I'm actually going back there in my mind as I talk about it. I want to be very careful when I tell you. I have seen them piled in chicken wire cages this big, just one on top of another to the point that they couldn't move. The animal abuse and neglect cases are horrific. I was at one point examining a waste dump, and I stood on top of an aluminum dross mountain after leachate came down in a rainstorm. And that is only the second worst smell that I have smelled as DA, because the worst smell was at a puppy mill. And we weren't even able to remove the puppies. My favorite line about pet abuse is this bottom line down here. Jeffrey Dahmer, the Boston Strangler, Son of Sam, all of them started off by torturing animals. And if we can interrupt their patterns while they're still on animals, we can stop them before they ever get to people. And if the cute puppy pictures don't get you, let the serial killer argument sink in. And please check all of these things that I am saying. I think if you find something and like me, you're like, I'm not sure that's right, please do your own research, because that's what I did. I didn't believe half of the stuff I'm now here telling you the first time I heard it. But I do believe that we can stop many of the serial killers. I have 3 that I know about that are active in my district that I yet to have evidence to remove them. Of course, I'm working on all 3. It's the most serious thing I'm thinking about right now is what are those 3 people doing. If we can get them here, then we don't have to fight them there. Very quickly, some criminal justice challenges for stopping family abuse. Barriers to reporting. In elder abuse, for example, the greatest generation, they don't complain. They don't bother other people with their problems. They're extremely private. To anyone who's my generation, the level of reluctance they have to talk about sexual abuse is very difficult to understand, but it's very real. And if this committee over this year and other years has a chance to handle barriers to reporting, I think that'd be some great ground for you all to take a look at. Lack of agency cooperation. Hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about this for a minute, but it's been getting better every year. It started off, it was really the #1 problem in Tennessee is that nobody was talking. Thanks to changes at CPS and APS, Child Protective Services and Adult Protective Services, it's getting better every year. And if you have questions about that, I'll answer some in a minute. Lack of investigative resources. I'm sure this is literally the first time anybody from law enforcement ever came up and told you maybe they could use a few more resources. But I'll tell you this, the more resources we get, the better outcomes that we can give. And nobody is sitting around saying, I've got too many people, would you like to borrow some? Criminal penalties. Tennessee criminal law is shockingly light when it comes to incarceration. And so there are certainly areas for targeted increases in criminal penalties if you'd like to do that. Of course, we all know that creates what? Fiscal note. So I'm very realistic about what I'm asking here, but there's fertile ground there if you want to try to grow something. Tracking and monitoring of others, that is on the rise. It's getting better every year. Heroes are needed to address the scourge of elder abuse head on, but who is wise enough to give a hoot? You are. This is the part where I want to go through and tell you that you have acted to protect children over the last several sessions. Here's just a very quick, and if your bill is not up here, I apologize in light of the time, but look at just some of the things you've done here. Strengthening aggravated rape of a child, removing statutes of limitations in certain circumstances, strengthening penalties against those who commit new offenses while on a sex offender registry. You have also acted to protect the elderly. Now, this one I know well. We had the Elderly and Vulnerable Adult Protection Act of 2017 that modernized and strengthened laws relating to elder financial abuse. Same thing in 2018. This time we attacked neglect. And then in 2019, we did physical abuse and sexual abuse. There are also several other bills that were passed during that time period to make sure seniors stay safe at home. What about spouses and partners? You guys didn't forget about them. Thank you for the legislation redefining domestic violence, coercion, and threats to allow us to prosecute those who try to deter their victims from testifying. Under the old law, our burden of proof was extremely high, and we could almost never reach it. And I can tell you in domestic abuse cases, it is far more common than it is uncommon for the batterer to attempt to intervene and dissuade the alleged victim from testifying, from going to court. Oh, honey, oh, baby, you remember that vacation to the Caribbean we've always talked about? That sort of thing happens all the time, all the time. Pass some legislation making it easier to get control over their cell phone accounts. Oftentimes, especially in partnerships, you may not have control over your cell phone account. I don't have control over my cell phone account. That's all great because everything's going great right now, but if things went south, that could be a problem very quickly. Some extra conditions on no contacts orders, things like that. What about animals? You didn't forget our four-legged friends. Got an animal abuse registry back in 2015. And new changes to a law that will allow those convicted of animal abuse to be barred from owning pets. I would submit, though, that there's significant further fertile ground here in the upcoming years. If you have an interest in this area, there are plenty of ideas floating around out there that you might find interesting. On the whole, you have demonstrated compassion and dedication. Thanks to you, government agencies are communicating better. There are fewer barriers to reporting abuse. Penalties are tougher in some areas, and we do a better job of warning the public when someone is dangerous. As a result, the sun is starting to shine in Tennessee. And so, on behalf of your partners in law enforcement, I want to say today, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You have been doing amazing, amazing work. You have done so much to give hope to those who have been in pain. There's still some room. Well, I'm going to touch on one or two areas real quickly you might want to consider, because there is always room to grow when it comes to combating family abuse. Here's some things. These are just off the top of my head that you may in upcoming years want to consider. Truth in sentencing, that is a huge one. Enhanced sentences for most violent offenders. Ways to preserve testimony. When the Elderly and Vulnerable Protection Act of 2018 went through, we got the ability to take depositions. Safe Seniors builds and expands on that this year. I have a heartbreaking case of some seniors that lost everything, over $1 million each in savings, all of their retirement, everything they'd worked their whole life for. Some people told them they had created a new kind of tire sealant, and without getting into all the details, they were very persuasive. They ended up with all this money, and the things I have had to do to try to prosecute that case while someone is suffering from dementia have just been, well, I could do a whole presentation just on that. Truth in sentencing, if you don't know, because you don't work in criminal area, most sentences are not served at 100% or 85%. We call them usually 100% sentences, but you always get enough jail credits to take it down 15%. So when the judge bangs down the gavel and says, Mr. Defendant, you've been so horrible, you're going to serve 10 years behind bars, only in the rarest of exceptions is that what's actually served. If you don't have an extensive criminal record, you'll serve 30% of that, but jail credits can take it even below 10% of the number that's done. These estimates are done only by the TDOC. They're done secretly, not in the sense of being under seal, but secretly in the sense of it's an internal process, and without FOIA or something, we don't have any way to find it out. And it only happens after the defendant has received its sentence. But this one line right here is the one I'd like for you to see. As a rule of thumb, defendants in Tennessee will serve 1 month for every year of their sentence. So when we talk about truth in sentencing, we want it to be closer than that, because when a judge bangs down a gavel and says 20 years, if they're serving it at range, it's going to be closer to 20 months. Now, that's the rule of thumb I use. That does not reflect the will of the conference. Actually, this whole presentation is simply my view. But it's really something to think about, because how are we lying to people when we say it's that many years? But here's the other thing, too. We can't tell anyone, no one on planet Earth can tell someone who has, say, suffered the most horrific violent abuse when their abuser is going to get out. And I assure you, that's information that someone who's been abused really, really, really wants to know. They lay awake at night, night after night, thinking about these things. If y'all can come up with some way, working with the governor separately, however it needs to be done to fix that, maybe fixing one of the biggest problems out there. The defendants also would really, really, really like to know when they're going to get out. So would the witnesses, so would the neighbors, so would everybody. You put all those groups together, and you know who really wants to know when people get out? Pretty much everybody, pretty much the whole electorate. There's some other things you could do here with sentences, increasingly targeted. You can look at those in a little bit. Supporting abuse programs, I also want to say in Paris, Tennessee, we run one of the finest batterers intervention programs out there. These things really, really, really work. They fix recidivism. They do a good job. Well, I accidentally just went through my last slide, which has my contact information on it. So if you'll give me just a second, let me go down here in case you need it. All
If
right,
you
there
can't
we
find
go.
it, Clint has all your information, so.
Pardon me?
If you can't find it, Clint has all your
There we
information.
go. That's my information right there. I don't know if I came in within 15 minutes. I hopefully came in not anything very different than that. That was a long presentation in light of how quickly you all went through your bills. I really appreciate the fact that you all gave me your attention for that long. I am a member of the Legislative Committee. I am authorized to speak to you on conference positions. I'm also authorized to speak to you on my own personal position if the conference, if it doesn't interfere with the conference's position. So if you all have questions on any of the subject matter that I've covered today, I am more than happy to talk to you. But if you were paying close attention, you realize in the ideas in there, they transcend any one particular school of thought or political party, which is why enterprising people can use combating family abuse to bring people together. It's something y'all have probably been doing for a very long time. I really wish that we could do more of it as time goes on.
We really appreciate you being here. It was a great presentation, and I recognized a few of those bills up there, in fact, a lot of them. So I do think we as a legislature, since I've been here, have really worked hard on child and elderly and pet abuse. Every year, I know we carry anywhere from 10 to 20, 30 of those bills. So not me, but I mean, I think and maybe there are more I've never even counted on to see. But does anyone have any questions?
Great presentation.
Well, let me say this then. I have no pride of authorship in this. My contact information is only on the last slide, and I assure you if you highlight that slide and press the delete button, it goes right away. And so if at any point anything in here would help you communicate some of the hard work that your committee's been doing to your constituents, please feel free to take this PowerPoint, adjust it as you like, and use it to show folks what y'all have been doing. Y'all have done a lot. You should be proud. Anybody ask me, I'll tell them that. And it's always a pleasure to work with you. If there's no other questions.
Thank you very much for being
All
here. We
right, thank you
appreciate
for
it.
allowing me to come down
Yes,
today.
without objection, we'll go back into session. Do I hear a motion for adjournment? We are adjourned.